Alright, so let's talk about the chiastic structure of Revelation, and we will begin by talking about the chiastic structure of Ezekiel. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, there is a very good reason why we want to do that, and it's this. There is a whole lot of Ezekiel contained in the book of Revelation. In fact, you will find 19 ideas that are in the book of Ezekiel that have been copied by John into Revelation. 19. That's a big contribution, don't you think? Ezekiel also had three visions. And yup, you will find quite a lot of these visions in the book of Revelation. And finally, the chiastic structure of Ezekiel, very, very similar to the chiastic structure of Revelation. Now, this whole video series, and it's a new series, is to help to understand the book of Revelation. And so understanding the book of Ezekiel will absolutely 100% help us to better understand Revelation. And there are two really big insights that we get from understanding Ezekiel and its chiastic structure. If the structure is highly similar to Revelation, then same author. This probably isn't too surprising, but now we can hold a position because we have the data. The chiastic structures are highly similar. So the figure of a man sitting on the throne that Ezekiel saw in chapter 1 matches the risen Jesus of Revelation chapter 1. And the chiastic structures of both books means we can correlate that figure with the risen Jesus. Now that's pretty cool, yeah? Facts, not printer. Facts, not printer. Now the second insight will blow your mind. I promise you, this is cutting-edge research from the Rapture Ready 2025 team. This insight is exclusive to this channel. The four living creatures that Ezekiel saw in his visions, these are the same living creatures that John saw and wrote about in Revelation, and they are always near the throne of God. So, based on Ezekiel's visions, we have developed an insight that identifies exactly what the four living creatures are in reality, because they are not literally four living creatures as described by Ezekiel, any more than the four beasts of the prophet Daniel are literally four beasts. So be sure to watch to the end for the big reveal, as I will identify what these four living creatures really are, and I promise your mind will be blown. So welcome to our new video series on the chiastic structure of Revelation. Alright, so now let's look at all of the ideas in the book of Ezekiel that found their way into the book of Revelation. So we wrote them onto a whiteboard, and there are 19 ideas here. You can count them if you want. Okay, so from the top left-hand corner and reading down, we got the throne room, we got the book or the scroll with 7 seals, we got 4 plagues, the wrath of God, sealing the saints, coals on the altar, no more delay. If you're familiar with the book of Revelation, then this should all be ringing a bell. So, okay, we got eating the book or the scroll, measuring the temple. Yup, we got Jerusalem and Sodom, the cup of wrath, top right-hand corner, can barely read it. Vine of the Lord, Vine of the Lord. Handwriting's a little small, but we're doing it, we're getting her done. So next is the great harlot, lamenting the city scavengers, and that's at the marriage supper of God. Then resurrection, and that's a big one, remember. And they stood on their feet, Ezekiel 37, hugely popular verse about Israel becoming a nation. And they stood on their feet. John writes this about the 2 witnesses, pure gold. Woo. And who can forget good old Gog and Magog?
Just a good old boy.
We're the good old Blues Brothers.
Never mean
Boys,
no
man,
harm.
from Chicago.
We're the good old boys.
Beats all you never saw. Been in trouble with the law since the day they was born. Straightening the curves, flattening the hills. Someday the mountain might get 'em, but the law never will. Making their way the only way they know how. That's just a little bit more than the normal allowed. Just a good old boy. Wouldn't change if they could. Fighting the system like a true modern day Robin Hood.
And lastly, the New Jerusalem, that's Ezekiel's temple, and the river of life, trees with leaves for healing. So yeah, beautiful. All right, so Ezekiel had 3 main visions He had the vision by the Kibar River, described in chapter 1, and I'll talk about this in a moment. The second vision was the fall of the city Jerusalem, and this is described in chapter 9. And the third vision was Ezekiel's temple as set out in chapters 40 to 48. Now we have analyzed the fall of the city and Ezekiel's temple in detail, and you'll find all of our videos in the Navy SEAL Bible Study playlist. I recommend you work through these videos if you haven't already done so, because I personally believe the findings are not only insanely mad, but they are robust, and we back up our findings with real data, historical data. So I'm confident because there's a lot of data, so it's not being cherry-picked to fit a couple of prophecies, but it's a cluster of facts that you build a strong understanding and a strong position. Both of these visions contain long-range prophecies that were fulfilled in the attack on the Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001, and the subsequent reconstruction of the World Trade Center, which opened in 2014. Alright, so now I can show you the chiastic structure of Ezekiel because these three visions are at the heart of this structure. So chapters 1 to 3, the throne of God, this was Ezekiel's first vision. Chapters 9 to 11, the second vision, the fall of the city. Now right at the end, chapters 40 to 48, the third vision, Ezekiel's temple, which God says is the place for his throne. Note the beginning and the end of Ezekiel were visions of God's throne. Ezekiel chapter 28, which is around the middle of the book, is the downfall of Satan. In our chiastic structure, this is the central axis of the chiasm. On both sides, you see the judgment of foreign nations, and on either side of that, the judgments on Jerusalem. And then on either side, the fall of the city in chapters 9 to 11, and the valley of dry bones, chapter 37, to Gog and Magog in chapter 39. And this symmetry shows the structure here is a spiral, a helix. See how you can work your way from one to the next, all the way to the center, like going down a vortex. So you normally see these drawn like this. Basically, the second half of the book is a similar story to the first half, but it's told in reverse. That's chiastic writing. It's a literary style that both Ezekiel and John were skilled in. And obviously Jesus, since he's really the true author of these books. And you flip it around where, for me personally, I see the chronology, so the flow through time, the history, and the future events. So, the downfall is Satan, the judgment of foreign nations, the judgments on Jerusalem, that's all history. The second woe, Israel being reborn in 1948, history. The third woe, 9/11, history. The rebuild of the World Trade Center as Ezekiel's temple, history. However, the throne of God is still future. So how similar do you think the chiastic structure of Revelation will be to Ezekiel's? Well, here's the chiastic structure of Revelation. So yeah, I'll talk more about this in the next video. Right now, I just want to show you it's very similar to Ezekiel. On the right-hand side in the middle of Revelation, chapter 12 actually, Satan gets cast out of heaven. He gets hurled down to the earth. On either side of these verses, Israel flees for 3.5 times, which is 1,260 years of actual time. Then on either side of chapter 12, we get the two witnesses and the two beasts, and that's chapters 11 and 13. Then on either side of those chapters, we get the trumpet judgments and the plagues, which is judgments on the Jews and judgments on foreign nations. We also have the 144,000 and the multitude or the harvest. And then the big one. I mean, there's so much going on in the first and the last chapters of Revelation, but certainly the risen Jesus, King of Kings, Lord of Lords on the throne, he is God, he rules with an iron scepter. The throne of God will come down out of heaven, the dwelling place will descend to the earth, and God will live among his people forever. It's totally amazing. But right now, the purpose here is to show you the chiastic structures are highly similar, and that means Jesus is the same author behind these revelations, these visions. Both John and Ezekiel received their visions from Jesus. But wait a minute, Ezekiel lived like 500 years before Jesus had been born, before he died, and before he rose again to obtain a spiritually transformed resurrected body, or a heavenly body, as the Apostle Paul says, right? You see, Jesus became the prototype of a heavenly body, a spiritually transformed body that Paul says all believers will receive at the resurrection and transformation of the saints. Jesus obtained this body after his resurrection. So how could Ezekiel have seen the risen Jesus 500 years before the resurrection even happened? Okay, here's where things are going to get freaky. We're about to go interstellar on yo ass. Christopher Nolan style, baby. And I mean, think Neil deGrasse Tyson. Think four-dimensional space-time. Okay? Angel cakes? And I mean, if you've watched like Neil deGrasse Tyson, you will know that if you could step outside of our three-dimensional world, then you would not be constrained by time. And according to Neil deGrasse Tyson, you could walk from the past to the future and turn around just as easy as walking up and down a street. Because the angel says to John, "Write down what you see." And John was in heaven when he was shown all this, so he escaped the limitations of our three-dimensional world.
Wait a minute. I said a four-dimensional creature. If we had access to the fourth dimension, which for us is what?
Time.
Time, but wait, we're prisoners of time. So suppose we weren't prisoners of time. Suppose you could move through time the way we move through space. Could you then escape the prison?
Yeah, just move to a time when I'm not in prison.
Exactly. Just say, let me get out of these six walls here. You just go back to a time before you got put into prison, or go to the future where you were let go from the prison.
Right.
Each of those counts as escaping the prison without ever breaking down the wall.
Right.
So time can serve that same role if you had access to the past and to the future.
That's pretty cool, man.
So what does this all mean? Well, I think it means that it was Jesus who caught John up to heaven, took him into the future, and told him to write down what he sees. Equally, Jesus could have walked back in time to visit Ezekiel, catch him up to the throne, and show him the future. And Neil deGrasse Tyson will back up the physics, although I'm not sure where he's at with believing in Jesus. But the physics, yeah, for sure. And so that's the first big insight, that Jesus showed Ezekiel the visions of the future. And now here's the second big insight, and this is the big reveal. Both Ezekiel and John saw four living creatures around the throne. To date, nobody has really unpacked these four living creatures. But based on our first big insight, yeah, we can take a shot at it. The four living creatures represent the first resurrection saints.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
What I'm talking about is this. It's plausible that Ezekiel saw the throne in its future state, where a multitude of saints, the first resurrection saints, when they were on earth, they endured the four beasts, or four empires. Ezekiel describes their faces as human, a lion, an ox, an eagle, which alludes to the four beasts under which they were killed. The description as four beasts is intentional, and we need to appreciate that. These are the saints who did not worship the beast or receive the mark of the beast and were killed for it, so four living creatures because they were the saints who endured during the reign of the four beasts of Daniel. Four beasts, four living creatures, right? Four beasts, four living creatures. Secondly, living creatures emphasizes living because they were dead, but Jesus has raised them up on the last day. Thirdly, Ezekiel said they were covered in eyes. The wheels within wheels were covered in eyes, and the spirit of the four living creatures was within the wheels. It's a multitude of eyeballs. A multitude of people. Imagine it's dark and all you see are the eyes staring at you. But belonging to the eyes are faces and people. Get it? And lastly, Ezekiel heard the sound of rushing waters coming from the four living creatures. The same sound as the first resurrection saints entering through the east gate of the temple, or the rushing waters of Revelation, chapter 19, when, as John said, his bride has made herself ready. And you can read Revelation and substitute in your mind the first resurrection saints for the four living creatures, and it makes sense. So this is what I personally believe the four living creatures represent. And Jesus may have told Ezekiel to write it up as four living creatures to keep their true identity hidden until the appointed time. And we are now literally 10 minutes to midnight here. The end of the age is at our doorstep. 6,000 years from Adam is up in 2031. There's no more time remaining for God's prophecies to be fulfilled. So I don't know, you tell me. What prophecies do you believe are still outstanding? The sixth trumpet, we've shown data that matches this to the Holocaust. The third woe, we've got data that matches this to 9/11. You see what I'm saying? With only 7 years remaining until 2031, what God proclaimed would happen must have happened by now. 10 minutes to midnight, we're practically at the finish line. At least 99.9% of all prophecy must have already happened. We just gotta find it. We have the internet, we can do the analysis, and that's what these videos are all about. So we go where the data leads, and when it leads to crazy ideas that seem like foolishness, then if the data supports it, then yeah, we'll present it. So if you're into crazy, then you've come to the right place. So we'll take a break here, and in the next video, we will begin to unpack the chiastic structure of Revelation. See you all soon.